Fear does not announce itself with footsteps. It arrives silently, tightening the chest, bending the spine, dimming the voice. It steals the strongest parts of a man before he ever steps into the world. But the old Japanese masters whispered a strange truth. A warrior does not kill fear. He walks so close to it that even its shadow begins to obey him. This story begins with a young man named Riku, whose life was shaped by distance. The distance between who he was and who he pretended to be. He spoke softly because he feared the echo of his own conviction. He held his breath whenever conflict rose, hoping it would pass like bad weather. People mistook his silence for humility, but inside him lived a storm that had never been allowed to break. Each night, fear visited him like an old ghost, sitting at the foot of his bed, whispering, "Not you, not today, not ever." Then came the rumor. An elder swordsman living deep in the mountains, a man villagers claimed had defeated fear itself. A man whose gaze felt like a locked drawer you weren't meant to open. A man whose silence cut deeper than most men's rage. Riku climbed the mountain hoping the elder would remove the weakness from his heart. Instead, the elder offered only one line, a line that cracked something inside him. Fear is not your enemy. Your distance from it is. If these words stir something in you, remain. Walk this path and discover what Riku found. The path up the mountain was steeper than Riku expected. Every step felt like a confession, that he was not as strong as he pretended to be, not as calm as he appeared, not as invisible as he wished. Cold wind scraped across his face like an old accusation. His breath trembled, not from the climb, but from the weight of everything he had avoided for years. Halfway up, he found a burned wooden marker. Its writing melted into black scars. No one spoke of what happened there, but villagers always lowered their voices when asked. A quiet warning, a half-revealed truth, a dopamine gap pulling him higher. By the time he reached the clearing, his legs shook, not from exhaustion, from anticipation. There, on a flat stone, sat the elder, unmoving, eyes closed, presence sharp enough to cut the wind around him. He didn't look at Riku, yet Riku felt seen. "Sit," the elder said, without opening his eyes. Riku obeyed. The silence closed around them like a door. At first, Riku tried to be respectful, back straight, hands on his knees, eyes lowered. But the silence began to itch under his skin. He heard everything he usually drowned, the shallow drag of his own breath, the uneven pounding of his heart, the small, pathetic swallow in his throat whenever his mind replayed old humiliations. Minutes felt like hours. His thoughts grew louder, then cruel. "You don't belong here. You're not a warrior. You're just a frightened child in a man's body." He shifted. The stone beneath him felt like judgment. Finally, he broke. "Master, what are we doing?" he whispered. Only then did the elder open his eyes. They were calm but unyielding, like a locked drawer that had waited centuries to be opened. "A man who cannot sit with himself," he said quietly, "cannot stand before others." Riku looked away, ashamed. The elder continued, voice low but cutting. "Modern men fear many things: failure, rejection, being forgotten. But beneath all of them is one deeper fear, meeting themselves with no distraction to protect them." Riku realized the enemy was not the mountain, nor the climb. It was the unguarded mirror of this silence. And before the elder would teach him the sword, he would first teach him how to breathe inside that mirror. Thus began the first lesson, the warrior's breath, waiting just beyond Riku's discomfort. The next morning, before the sun had fully claimed the sky, the elder led Riku to a narrow ridge overlooking a valley drowned in mist. The world felt half-formed, quiet, suspended, waiting, the perfect place to learn what most men ignore their entire lives. The elder placed a hand on his own lower abdomen. "This," he said, "is where a warrior lives. Not the chest, not the mind. Lower, deeper, where instinct, presence, and fear share the same doorway. Riku tried to imitate him, but his breath stayed high, trapped in the ribs, sharp and panicked. The elder watched, eyes calm yet piercing, like someone reading a burned ledger and still understanding what once existed beneath the ash. "You breathe like a hunted man," he said, "and a hunted man dies before he is ever touched." A flicker of shame passed through Riku's face. The elder stepped behind him. Again, but this time, breathe as if the earth itself is filling you. Riku inhaled. The ground felt closer. The world steadied. Something inside him shifted, small but unmistakable. A first crack in the armor of fear. Riku exhaled slowly, and for a moment, the trembling in his hands softened. Not vanished, softened, like a storm deciding whether to break or pass. The elder nodded. Fear travels on shallow breath. Strength travels on deep breath. And mastery. He tapped Riku's lower abdomen. Lives here. He guided Riku again, this time placing a stone on the young man's belly. Make it rise. Make it fall. If the stone does not move, neither will your spirit. The pressure forced Riku inward, into the place he had always avoided. His mind tried to escape. Fragments of old humiliations, the face of a father who never listened, the memory of a teacher who called him too timid. But with each deliberate inhale, the noise quieted. With each steady exhale, the shame dissolved into something else, not pride, but presence. The elder leaned close. Remember this. Fear rides the breath. Control the breath. And you ride fear. As the valley mist thinned, Riku felt a strange clarity rising inside him, a calm he had never earned before, yet desperately needed. He didn't know it yet, but this new steadiness would be tested sooner than he imagined. Night came with a kind of darkness that did not simply cover the world. It emptied it. The elder led Riku into the bamboo grove without a word. The stalks were tall, thin, swaying like silent witnesses. Moonlight barely pierced the canopy, leaving long, trembling shadows stretching across the ground like black threads. Riku felt something tighten in his chest. A familiar tremor, the same one he hid from as a child whenever the house creaked at night and he imagined ghosts living between the walls. The elder stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without warning, the elder stepped back and vanished into the dark. Riku's breath caught. The grove suddenly felt alive. Bamboo creaked like bones adjusting. Leaves whispered like voices discussing his fate in a language he wasn't meant to understand. A single thought rose inside him, sharper than fear. You are alone. A lie. But one his mind believed instantly. His hands trembled. His stance collapsed inward. The darkness moved closer. Riku forced himself to steady his breath, the way the elder had taught. In through the lower belly. Out like he was releasing a burden he'd carried for years. The shadows did not vanish, but they stopped growing teeth. A bamboo stalk cracked sharply behind him. He spun, heart pounding, only to find nothing. Just darkness folding over itself like a locked drawer he wasn't ready to open. Then another sound. Closer. Not danger. Memory. The whisper of old shame. The echo of a classroom where he stood frozen while others laughed. The weight of a father's disappointment pressed into his spine. He wasn't afraid of the forest. He was afraid of these fragments resurfacing in the dark. Finally, he widened his stance. Feet grounded, breath deep, eyes open. And the darkness loosened. The elder emerged from behind a cluster of bamboo, silent as smoke. You do not fear the night, he said. You fear the parts of yourself hidden inside it. Riku exhaled, a long, shaking breath. For the first time, the shadows didn't feel like enemies, but mirrors. He didn't know it yet, But the next test would strike at something far more fragile than fear, the trembling ego he had spent years protecting. For 2 days, Riku carried himself with the quiet pride of someone who believed he had slain an inner demon. His breath was steady, his steps grounded. Even the bamboo groves no longer own the same shadows. But life always tests the man who thinks he is ready. Riku met the wandering swordsman on the lower trail, a tall, wiry figure sharpening his blade against a cracked stone. The man looked up with a smirk carved too sharply across his face. "Well, look at this," the swordsman said, a mountain boy pretending to be a warrior. The words were simple, but they slipped between Riku's ribs like thin knives. His heartbeat spiked, his palms dampened. Old trembles returned like unwanted ghosts, the kind that lived in locked drawers Riku thought he had sealed. He tried breathing as the elder taught, but breath is the first thing ego steals when it feels threatened. The swordsman stepped closer. "Show me your stance, or are you too fragile for that?" Riku's throat tightened. He wasn't afraid of the man. He was afraid of what failing in front of him meant, a fear far older than blades. They faced each other on the dusty path, one with a real sword, the other with an invisible war inside his chest. Riku raised his stance, but his body betrayed him. Knees too tight, shoulders too high, breath too shallow. The swordsman laughed, a sharp, joyless sound. "I've seen children stand stronger than that." Riku froze. In one sudden motion, the swordsman stepped in, angled his blade, and stopped it a hair's width from Riku's neck. No cut, no wound, just public exposure. "You're not scared of dying," the man whispered. "You're scared of looking weak while you do." Later, Riku knelt before the elder, eyes lowered in shame. "I failed," he murmured. The elder shook his head. "No, you revealed." He drew a thin red thread in the dirt, loose at one end, anchored at the other. "This is ego. It trembles when it is not tied to anything real. The spirit, however," he tapped the anchored side, "does not shake." Riku stared at the thread, feeling how often he'd lived from the loose end. What the elder taught him next would not harden him. It would make him so soft inside that nothing could break him again. When the morning sun finally broke over the mountain, Riku felt its warmth differently, not as light, but as permission. He descended the trail with a steadiness that did not belong to the boy who had arrived days earlier. Every footstep carried a quiet certainty, a presence that did not need to announce itself. At the village edge, life looked the same. Children arguing over a wooden top, merchants shouting prices, old men whispering over tea. Yet Riku felt everything differently. A pot slipped from a woman's hands, shattering near his feet. The sudden sound once would have made him flinch. But now, his breath settled in his lower belly, his stance widened unconsciously, and the shock dissolved before it reached his spine. He didn't react. He responded. Calm, grounded, whole. And that was when he saw him, the wandering swordsman, leaning against a post, waiting as if destiny had circled back for one unfinished conversation. This time, Riku did not avoid his gaze. He walked straight toward him. The swordsman pushed off the post, a smirk already forming, the same sharp expression that once cracked Riku's resolve like thin ice. "So," the man taunted, "the fragile boy returns." But the words slid through the air and died before reaching Riku's chest. He breathed once, low, deep, deliberate. His spine didn't bend. His gaze didn't tremble. His presence filled the space between them like a quiet, grounded force. The swordsman's hands tightened around the hilt of his blade. Something in him sensed a shift, not in Riku's muscles, but in the stillness behind his eyes. Riku didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't raise anything. He simply stood, unmoved, unafraid, unreachable by insult or threat. The swordsman took one step back, not because Riku threatened him, but because Riku no longer needed to. Some men conquer with steel, some with anger, but the rarest conquer with a calm so complete it exposes every insecurity in the room. The elder's lessons had landed. Fear was no longer a chain. It had become a lantern, one Riku carried into every shadow without blinking. And though the mountain was behind him, another path had begun, one that required a different kind of courage, the courage to live this truth among those who still feared their own reflection.